Thank you, Elder Hendricks. Happy Sabbath, brethren. Thank you. Ooh, that sounds better. Brethren, I'm delighted once again to be here addressing the people of the true and living God. And I thank the leadership for giving me the continued opportunity to share some thoughts with the brethren. I greet members of the body, visitors who are here with us, those who are watching online. I greet you all in the mighty name of our God, our Father, and our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, who will indeed return to establish his kingdom on this earth. Brethren, I have a lot to say and a limited time in which to say it. So I'll get straight into the matter at hand. I just wanted to do a quick survey. So I'm aware of the audience that I have in front of me and whether you'll be truly impacted by today's message and what it means. Now, by raise of hand, how many of you have bought something made in China? A lot of people. Jordan hasn't bought anything made in China. All right. How many persons own a car? All right. How many persons have ordered a number one at Burger King? How many persons enjoy a good corned beef and white rice? And I don't have to ask, but I will, but how many people use WhatsApp, YouTube, Instagram, Google, or have a smartphone? Brethren, for some time now, the world has been in an international crisis that has affected almost every person on the earth. A crisis so impactful around the world that nations are gathering together to come up with solutions. A crisis so impactful that world leaders have to contemplate what the future holds for the existence of human life on earth. I'm not referring to COVID, I'm not referring to any vaccine. And to be honest, that is baby stuff compared to what I'm addressing today. On November 13th, 2021, world leaders concluded the 26th annual holding of the Conference of the Parties, and for short, that is called COP26, which is the UN's biggest conference, and it focuses on climate change. This year, the topic was 1.5 degrees Celsius. The question was, how do we limit warming on the earth to 1.5 degrees compared to pre-industrial levels, instead of allowing the earth to warm to 2 degrees or higher by the end of the century? Now, for those of you who didn't understand quite exactly what I was just talking about, the Industrial Revolution started in the 1800s, thereabout. And since that time, manufacturing processes, mass production has been on the increase. And what that means is that greenhouse gases are being emitted into the Earth's atmosphere and therefore contributing to a rise in temperature worldwide. Scientists predict that if the current warming rate around the world continues, human-induced warming will reach 2.7 degrees by the end of this century. Currently, we are at 1 degree above pre-industrial levels. The problem is our society has become addicted to a lifestyle heavily dependent on mass production of goods, services, food. And we're heavily reliant on burning fossil fuels for energy, which have all contributed to greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide and methane being emitted into the Earth's atmosphere at alarming rates. The increased temperatures at 1% has seen deadly weather disasters intensified by climate change in recent months. We've seen asphalts being melted by heat waves, flash floods around the world taking many lives, untamable wildfires, a constant rise in sea levels, an increase in powerful storms, harsher famines, and a diminished access to fresh water. Developed nations are contributing significantly more to the problem, while their less developed counterparts feel the effects and the impact. The trade-off has been significant, as the much-needed help that has been promised is not forthcoming. Earthquakes are increasing with frequency and intensity. Haiti can tell a tale after a devastating earthquake in 2010, a magnitude of 7.2 on the Richter scale. Hurricanes are increasing in intensity. Countries like Barbuda, St. Martin, and Haiti once again have suffered loss of life and damage near apocalyptic scale. A hurricane in 2017 left devastations of epic proportions in the Caribbean. While Jamaica has had near misses recently, Jamaica has felt the impact in the past and still feels its effect today. Countries like Jamaica no longer have a beach like Hellshire to enjoy, as our coral reefs that protect our beaches die, and along with it, the fishes that we so enjoy. The beachfront has been swallowed up by surging tides as a result of a decade of climate change and mismanagement. We are at 1% above pre-industrial levels in warming. If we are witnessing this at 1%, can you imagine what 2.7% would look like? Complete and utter devastation. And that is the current rate at which the earth, or the path on which the earth is on. At the end of the century, I might not be here, but Reese, my little son, might be 80. And if God spares his life, I can only imagine what devastation he will see if the Messiah does not return by that time. The problem is even deeper when we start to understand how the world is connected. The top 7 emitters are responsible for nearly 2/3 of emissions. The top 7 out of over 200 countries are responsible for 2/3 of gas emissions into the atmosphere. China leads the pack at 26% contribution, followed by the United States at 13%, followed by the EU at 7.6%. And this top 7 finishes off with India, Russia, Japan, and Brazil at 2.1%. The cheap things that we buy in downtown or off Amazon, the clothes that we wear that are made in China, are powered by factories using coal for electricity, generating an enormous amount of emissions in the air. And sometimes the question is, if China was supposed to change, would we be willing to pay the rising cost of goods and services? EU and Japan, the top car makers of the world, Just making a car creates more emissions into the atmosphere than you driving the car for the full length of the car's life. Just creating a car. The USA has internet and social media companies like Amazon, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Google, YouTube, which all store mass amount of data that need to be stored, housed, processed, and analyzed using massive amounts of electricity. Would you be willing to give up social media and the internet to save lives? And for those of you who are investing in cryptocurrencies and digital currencies, which the world is heading towards, I'll just remind you, it takes massive amount of energy to mine the cryptocurrency. Brazilian companies supply almost 100% of corned beef to Jamaica. In fact, according to Bloomberg News, Brazil supplies 20% of the global beef exports and almost 40% of chicken exports around the world. Grace Kennedy in particular receives most of its beef from Brazil. And I don't know if you've watched the news with Brazil in the last couple of years, but they have been burning the Amazon to make way for land to raise cattle. And the more cattle that they raise is the more methane that grows into the air and the more deforestation that happens, which also contributes to increasing the temperatures worldwide. A little bit closer to home, the Jamaican government continuously mines in our cockpit country, contributing to deforestation and landslides. That is the problem that was discussed at COP26 this year. Code red, no planet B. What is the solution? Globally, all the countries of the world will collectively have to reduce their emissions by 7% yearly until 2030 to achieve the target of keeping the warming at 1.5% by 2050. Just to give you a little idea of what this means. Last year with the pandemic, with our lockdowns or decreased activities on the road, the world reduced emissions by just 6%. It means that we will need to go through another decade of COVID-19 lockdowns to keep us on track, to even give us a possibility of existing. We'd have to change the way we eat, change the way we use energy, change the things that we buy and need, change how we travel, change how we have sex in order to control population growth. And if a campaign to get people to take a vaccine was hard, can you imagine what it will take to change so many lifestyles? The reality from COP26 is that there's no equity in the world. The delegates left feeling betrayed. The most important conference the UN has annually. The usual blockers to the agreements, Russia and Saudi Arabia, the second and third largest oil-producing nations, were once again still blocking any agreement in its reduction. Oil and gas companies who profit in the billions of dollars basically said, we can't change much. India, South Africa, and China almost derailed the entire conference last minute with amendments saying that they need to change the phrase from phasing out coal to phasing down. obviously most of the countries were angry. The pledge by wealthy nations to provide annually climate funding of $1 billion from 2020 onwards to poorer countries who bear the greatest impact of warming has not been delivered. And interesting enough, everybody was looking at China to see what they will do, because as the largest emitter, the world cannot do it without China. 100 countries, including the EU, the USA, pledged to reduce emissions of methane gas by 2030. But here's the flip side. China said no. We will be at our largest producing by 2030 and hope to reduce it later on by 2060. There's no equity in the world. Has the love gone cold? Kenyan climate activist Elizabeth Wathuti, at the opening ceremony of the World Leaders Summit at COP26, asked the question, or demanded, please open your hearts. Mia Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados, stated that the inability to provide the finance needed is measured in lives and livelihoods. This is immoral and unjust. She further asks, how many voices and how many more pictures must we see on the screens without being able to move? Or are we so hardened and blinded that we can no longer appreciate the cries of humanity? In our own country, we have gangs decapitating people and playing football with a head in social media videos going viral. Brethren, this is the world that we currently live in. And if we pay attention to our Messiah and what he had said to his disciples, it is only going to get worse. For those of you who are listening or taking notes, we can turn to Matthew 24, verses 3 to 14. A lot of us know it, but I'm just going to read it so we understand the severity of what we're talking about. As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And Jesus answered them, see that no one leads you astray, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are but the beginning of birth pains. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures until the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the world as a testimony to all nations. And then the end will come. Brethren, I spent some time talking about climate change and the tracking of civilian emissions into the atmosphere. What I just read identified several things, including war and the rumors of war. A lot of these numbers about these countries who are producing so much to destroy the earth does not take into account military activity around the world. And one overlooked fact, as I sat there and I watched Barack Obama deliver a heartwarming speech is the hypocrisy of the United States. The U.S. military alone is a bigger polluter than more than 100 countries combined. If the U.S. military were a country, its fuel usage alone would make it the 47th largest emitter of greenhouse gases. Combined, they have spent close to $10 billion on oil and its burning. And brethren, that is not unnoticed by other countries in the world. China, for example, recently started to increase its military spending to ensure that it protects its trade routes near Taiwan. Tensions are rising. The earth is being destroyed. And there's no solution in sight. What is the point that I'm making with all this information? In Genesis 1:28, mankind was given dominion over the earth to rule. Almost as if we're getting a practice run for something greater. And because of sin, greed, pride, and lust of power, we're on a path to destroy the very creation that we were charged to protect and manage. I watch people cry as they were thinking about the gravity of the situation. I too am disgusted by what the world has become. But I have hope in something greater. Elder Ken Allen at the Feast of Tabernacles spoke about the concept of marriage and how the Messiah is the husband where the church is the bride. And the question must be asked, what is it that this husband of the bride will be doing? And this is the heart of the gospel of the kingdom of God and what it means to us today who live in a world that is on a destruction path. In Isaiah 2, verses 1 to 4, we should all be familiar, but for those who are watching online, you can do further studies on it. It tells us what the Messiah will return to do, what this husband will come and do to this earth. It reads, "It shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be lifted above the hills, and all nations shall flow to it. And many people shall come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the Lord, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem." And in verse 4, the most significant verse for persons today who left that conference betrayed. "He shall judge between the nations, and shall decide disputes for many people. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore." Brethren, despite the hopeful or hopelessness of the world, I'm happy to tell you that equity will return to the earth. A government will be established on this earth, headquartered in Jerusalem. This is the heart of our doctrine and our theology. This is one of the things that makes us different from many other groups claiming to be Christians around the world. The implications of Isaiah 2 are fundamental to the true gospel of Jesus Christ. There will be no living in heaven for 1,000 years, like what the SDA teach. The earth will not be empty for the millennial reign of Christ. Heaven will not be the final destination of the saints, which is taught by the apostate Roman Church and many of the Protestant groups which form a majority of Christianity today. The prophets of the Bible, which the disciples of Jesus read and understood, teach clearly that the 12 tribes of Israel will be regathered to Jerusalem and that righteous judgment will be executed from Jerusalem. In Acts 1:6-8, and I want you to pay attention very carefully to the question that's been asked. There are people in the congregation that question whether we truly understand what the gospel means. That sometimes we come to the services, we hear these things, and it does not register. So please pay attention so that you can answer them when you're asked. In Acts 1:6-8, when they had come together, they asked the Messiah before he ascended, "Lord, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel?" He said to them, "It is not for you to know the times or the seasons that the Father has fixed by his own authority." We should understand that no matter what we see happening in the world, no matter how hopeless it seems, the Messiah will come and reign. In Matthew 24 that I quoted earlier, in verse 14, he said that the gospel of the kingdom of God will be proclaimed throughout the world as a testimony to all nations. And brethren, it therefore means for us as the church of God and as individuals that we must be prepared to make spreading the gospel our number one priority. Too many of us are falling short. Just recently, I was talking to some members of the IOR, and we had to remove some of them because there is no participation. Nobody had any time in helping us to spread the gospel. No dedication. Some of them don't even answer. And I thought to myself, if I have to get external persons and pay them to spread the gospel, this is what will be done. I wonder sometimes, what are we investing our time in? This world that is coming to an end, when we have been given a mandate that is clear. To go a little bit deeper into Elder Allen's message, he further said that the bride, which is the church of God, which is you, which is me, as a collective, should be preparing ourselves for when our husband returns, that we may assist him in what he's going to do. And if Christ is going to be judging the nations and executing righteous judgment, it also means that you will be doing the same. Let's turn quickly to 1 Corinthians 6 and listen to insight from the Apostle Paul giving counsel to the Corinthian church. When one of you has a grievance against another, does he dare go to the Lord before the unrighteous instead of the saints? Or do you not know that the saints will judge the world? And if the world is to be judged by you, are you incompetent to try trivial cases? Do you not know that we are to judge angels? How much more then matters pertaining to this life? So if you have such cases, why do you lay them before those who have no standing in the church? I say this to your shame. Can it be that there is no one among you wise enough to settle a dispute between the brothers? But brother goes to the law against brother, and that before unbelievers? Brethren, the essence of what Paul is saying is that we as the church of God in this life, as individuals, should be dispensing justice and righteousness now. Wherever we find ourselves, are we really being a light to the world? In your workplace, if you see injustice, do you side with your boss who is more powerful? Or will you stand up for the poor worker? Jonah, what about you? Does that affect you? You're siding with your boss, don't it? You might look like you side with your boss, man. Jonah will say, yeah, man, let them go on, man. But brethren, these are serious questions. Because it then goes to the heart of who we are. And are we just a friendly place at church when we come here on Sabbath? How do we operate in our communities and our families in the week? Do people even know that you go to church? Do people even know that you're a Christian and what you proclaim? These are serious questions. Brethren, with that said, I have an example of what judgment in this time shall look like for us and what it means, and some lessons for us to learn that we can apply to ourselves. I want to use the example of King Solomon. Incidentally, the men's ministry has been looking at words of wisdom by King Solomon. And I found his judgment as he assumed the role of king to be instrumental in understanding what it is that the people of God should be doing in this life, in preparation as a bride for when our Messiah comes to execute judgment. It's found in 1 Kings 3, 16 to 28. And I spent a little bit of time there. That's 1 Kings 3, 16 to 28. And this tale of judgment involves King Solomon and two prostitutes. The narration goes like this in verse 16. It says, then two prostitutes, and this is shortly after King Solomon became king, two prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. The one woman said, "Oh, my lord, this woman and I live in the same house, and I gave birth to a child while she was in the house. Then on the third day after I gave birth, this woman also gave birth. And we were alone. There was no one else with us in the house. Only we two were in the house. And this woman's son died in the night because she lay on him. And she arose at midnight and took my son from beside me while your servant slept, and laid him at her breast, and laid her dead son at my breast. When I rose in the morning to nurse my child, behold, he was dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning, behold, he was not the child that I had born." And by the way, this still happens in Jamaica today. Children in the hospital go missing. But the other woman said, "No, the living child is mine, and the dead child is yours." The first said, "No, the dead child is yours, and the living child is mine." Thus they spoke before the king. The king said, the one says, "This is my son that is alive, and your son is dead." And the other says, "No, but your son is dead, and my son is the living one." And the king said, "Bring me a sword." So a sword was brought before the king. And the king said, divide the living child in two and give half to the one and half to the other. Sound fair? Now I agree, equal rights. Then the woman whose son was alive said to the king, because her heart yearned for her son, O my lord, give her the living child, and by no means put him to death. But the other said, he shall be neither mine nor yours, divide him. Then the king answered and said, give the living child to the first woman, and by no means put him to death. She is the mother. And all Israel heard of the judgment that the king had rendered, and they stood in awe of the king because they perceived that the wisdom of God was in him to do justice. Brethren, there are a couple of lessons that we can take away from this. Now, looking at the narration of the story, one of the things that should stand out to us immediately is that this was a king. He held the highest position in all of Israel. And before him were two prostitutes, usually regarded as the lowest in the kingdom. Despite their place in society, King Solomon still delivered justice. He didn't run them. He didn't allow it to bias his decision. No matter where they were in life, he still delivered justice. I asked that question earlier about our workplaces and in our community, because the truth is that as we're growing up, a lot of us are taught, make sure you curry favor so you can get by in life. Make sure you have the right link and play it right so you can get by. Elder Hendricks last week spoke to us about new wine in old wineskin. As the people of God, it requires us to change our thinking. We can't go by society's standard. It doesn't matter who is in front of you. You still have to execute justice. Rich or poor, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if it's your boss. More importantly, it doesn't matter if it's your family member. Doesn't matter if it's your wife or your husband. If them wrong, them wrong. How much of us really reflect on justice in that way? If your friend that you grew up with all your life did something wrong, would you choose them over a stranger? If your mother and father did the wrong thing, would you choose to say, it's okay, mommy, it's okay, daddy, because you are who I depend on? Or would you tell them that they're wrong? Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter your social status. And what I want to point out here, the only way that we can truly know this is if we understand the very character of God. If we're actually reading the laws of God. If we understand how he wants us to think. Because in studying the law and the Torah, we can see this lesson of no partiality coming out in how justice should be delivered. You can find that example in Exodus 23, verses 1 to 3, and I'll read it. You don't have to turn there. When this was being given by Moses to the children of Israel, it says, you shall not spread a false report. You shall not join hands with a wicked man to be a malicious witness. You shall not fall in with the many to do evil. Nor shall you bear witness in a lawsuit, siding with the many, so as to pervert justice. Nor shall you be partial to a poor man in his lawsuit. Later down in verse 6, it says, you shall not pervert justice due to the poor in his lawsuit. So you shouldn't side with the poor against the rich. And you shouldn't not give the poor his time for justice. Brethren, that requires us to truly remove the fear of man and put the fear of God first. It requires us to remove the love of social acceptance or being popular and ensure that we have the fear of God first to execute justice. And that is the first lesson. Doesn't matter your social status, doesn't matter who you are. That should not affect your sense of justice. If you are truly being prepared as a bride of Christ, and you will be with your husband, the Messiah, to execute judgment on this world, you have to understand what executing justice looks like. Lesson 2. Have the patience and self-restraint to hear both sides of a story. Interesting in this story, a lot of times we hear the Proverbs, and I have it here, Proverbs 18:17. The one who states his case first seems right until the other man comes and examines him. And I used to hear Pastor Boy use this all the time. Usually the first man who is wrong. And then you examine him after, and then you find out that the man who come right is after. But in this case, the first woman who went was the right one. And Solomon still did not rush to judgment. He waited. He had the patience and the self-restraint to hear both sides. I find this as a common problem in Jamaica in our local context of how gossip spreads and how people rush quickly to judgment and put themselves in predicaments. Sometimes you hear a story, and when you hear the story, the way the story is told, listen, not even Jesus off of the cross could have come convince you otherwise. But the person who is articulating the story sometimes leaves out a one detail that would change the entire context of what is being said. Or them leave out a little part that don't make them look bad, so that you will come on their side and give them the encouragement that they need to continue on the path that they are. We're often presented with situations where we make a judgment. It could even happen that somebody is not friendly and kill it dead, then bad mind you. Don't know the person from Adams. Sometimes we meet people, their tone is off or them timing wrong. And our first assessment is, that person is my enemy. Somebody might look at you in a certain way or give a certain statement. In fact, there are a lot of situations that we see that happening. I recently had this happen to me at my house. So we were doing some construction at home. And there was a work crew that came in and they were doing some work. And Brethren, I went downstairs and I had some personal items on me. And I usually keep it in a case of something that I got that was expensive. It's not in there anymore. I use the case for something else, Still look pretty, so I like it. Workmen were there for a couple of hours and then they left. So I went downstairs and I saw the case open, stashed in a box to the side, or a suitcase rather. I swear my mind playing tricks on me, Because I'm saying, no, man, I had this case. Open it, items were missing. And everything started, you start to play back everything in your mind. Like you wonder, what could happen here? And I started to play back the workmen being there. And there was one particular one, Yeah, man, something not right, Now in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, same day I look for me shady. Him they look, him just fished like him. I say, yeah, man, say, probably all the one day, Supervisor was there, and I was saying to myself, I call supervisor and tell him, say, I know which one to, Because in all my mind, I'm playing back everything. And as much as I could see, he was the only one that was missing from my vision. So in my mind, I'm saying, yes. I know which one. And I wanted to feel like I'm getting justice. Somebody come into my house and thief my things. I felt very violated. And sometimes we have that impulse, we want justice right now. And it happens sometimes even when it's a jungle justice happening, Something happening in the community and you all feel say somebody, they might burn down the house, them not ask the question, I'm just going to burn that down. Tomorrow morning you get up and you say, boy, say, I'm the wrong man. That was happened to me. And for the entire day I battled with it. Like I said, I went call the supervisor. And I say, no worry, no, not right. You have no evidence. You don't know. And you don't know which part of the day somebody could have gone and you don't see. Sometimes it's just easy. Talking to somebody else who was there, because there are a couple of people at the house. And somebody said to me, Ray, you didn't realize that man was looking at you funny? I said, you see it too, right? I said, yeah, man. I said, no. I wait it out and see. Next morning, supervisor calls me. And I said to him, I didn't want to accuse, I don't like accusing people. I don't like do it. Because if you're wrong, serious thing. I said to him, you trust all the men? And he said to me, say no, I have to fire one of them yesterday. And I said, I dead for know which one, And he said, yeah, man, one tall one in one red shirt. I say, tall one in a red shirt? I said, why? I say, every time I take it on a work site, something missing. I say, really? Me not think about no tall man in no red shirt. The one next like Indian coolie one me I talk about. Man say, yeah, man, I have to let him go yesterday, man. And I say to myself, boy, look on that. Never wait to hear all the data, hear all sides before I make a judgment. And sometimes our sense of justice gets in the way of justice because we want it immediately instead of waiting. King Solomon never did that. He allowed everything to come out first before he made a judgment. And brethren, spiritually, that also has implications for how we deal with our life. When we get an opportunity, sometimes because of desperation and we can't control our emotions, we're saying, God is working out something for me now. Long may I suffer? Yes. God is giving me justice now. We're going to the situations, not asking what is the worst case scenario. What does this mean? We might get a job, paying lots of money, and we say, yes, we're going to accept it right now. And when you turn it out, you can't get Sabbath, you can't get feast days. The pressure that you're under, you're burnt out. You have no time for God anymore. Can't even help in any activities for church. And when you're halfway in it, although you're getting more money, you really have to think, was it worth it? If I had waited, if I'd prayed, if I'd asked God, if I'd gotten counsel, If I saw all the information and the implications before I made my decision, would I have been here today? King Solomon waited. I committed to us to also wait and test. And that brings me to the third lesson that King Solomon can give us, which is to test everything. Although we heard the story, we see that he asked for the sword still to go and split the baby in half. Divide the child in two, he said. And he waited to see which one would come out. Brethren, this is one of the most important lessons in terms of testing everything. Paul writes in 1 Thessalonians 5, verses 14 to 21. That's 1 Thessalonians 5, 14 to 21. And we urge you, brothers, admonish the idle, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, be patient with them all. See that no one repays anyone evil for evil, but always seek to do good to one another and to everyone. Rejoice always, pray without ceasing, and give thanks in all circumstances. For this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you. Do not quench the spirit, and here, importantly, do not despise prophecies, but test everything. It would be remiss of me, brethren, and for those who are watching online, not to bring up the case of late Pastor Kevin Smith of Pathway International. Brethren, it was reported that he healed people. I heard of a case of one woman having an issue of blood, and two sisters were arguing in a voice note, and she said, look, when you go to the pastor, don't your blood issue did stop, and you're healed. He prophesied over people's lives, and it came through. The Gleaner reported from an eyewitness account on the night of the atrocities. He asked one woman, do you believe I am God? The woman said yes. Do you believe I can resurrect you? The woman said yes. He ordered them to slash her throat so that he could show that he could resurrect her. And brethren, the question of this testing everything is, in the last days of signs and wonders, do you have a test for false prophets? Do you know what to ask them? Suppose, Brother Foster, a man come in right now and heal you. Eh? Suppose you all turn over on the ground now and a man just come up and say, arise! And get up and walk. What would you ask him? Would you have a proper test? How would you know that this person is false? Because, brethren, up until that night, many of them were in the congregation. Many of them saw. How would you know? The same Matthew 24 in verse 23 to 24 says, then if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there he is, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray if people, even the elect, will be deceived. Brethren, we have supernatural forces in this world. Paul asks us, don't you know you'll judge angels? There's a supernatural world. Things will happen in the end. But I'll tell you this, I have my test for everything. If I see a man get up, dead, I have a list of questions I start asking. I'll be like, okay, Mr. Dead Man, sir. What will happen to the kingdom of Israel? Will it be restored? All right. What happened to the laws of God? Do I have to keep them or are they abolished? Okay. Will the kingdom be in Jerusalem or in heaven? In heaven? Okay. Do I have to love my neighbors? Or should I hate them and despise them because you commanded me? I must hate them. Okay. So tell me something. If you are the Messiah, and this is the ark, the Bible tells me, say, water not going to destroy the earth no more. So where the ark go? You have to have some questions and test things. You have to ask some serious questions. And if anybody goes against the prophets like Isaiah to tell you that the Messiah will not come and restore the kingdom to the earth, they are false. And that's why I said at the beginning, this goes to the heart of our gospel and our theology. Finally, brethren, we must understand also that if we are to be preparing ourselves as a bride and be preparing ourselves to judge the nations, we should also understand that our period of judgment is now. 1 Peter 4, 16 to 19, and I'm coming to a close shortly. It says, "Yet if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God in that name. For it is time for judgment to begin at the household of God. And if it begins with us, what will be the outcome of those who do not obey the gospel of God? And if the righteous is scarcely saved, what will become of the ungodly and the sinner?" Doctrinally, although we understand that everybody will not be judged now, we must be asking ourselves the deeper question: can I judge myself and my actions today? Can we wait until the Messiah returns to find out if we have fell short? Judging yourself and humbling yourself is the greatest thing that you can do in this life. The absence of certain virtues would indicate immaturity. Have you carefully considered how many persons have lost a love for the truth in this little pandemic? I thought it would take more than this for so many people to be scattered. I expected some of us to be killed, some of us to be stoned, some of us to be put in jail. Just simply not meeting together has had tremendous effects. Are we really ready for what is coming? Brethren, I would like to leave you with this final scripture, giving you hope in a world that is on its path to destruction. A world that has no solutions, but we have one. It's at the heart of our doctrine. Our Messiah will return to solve the world's problems. A kingdom will be established on this earth to usher in a period of peace. He gave us Revelation 2:26 to 29. The one who conquers and who keeps my works until the end. To him I will give authority over the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron, as when earthly pots are broken in pieces. Even as myself I received authority from my Father, I will give him the morning star. He who has an ear, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Amen.